we have a hard winter, we have a die-off for whatever reason. We start to build this deer herd back, and we get these numbers back where they're looking pretty good, and then all of a sudden we start hunting does again. And almost invariably it crashes 2 years later. So I'm in support of giving staff every tool in the toolbox that they need to properly manage our wildlife. So I can support having a doe hunt code. But I'm with you gentlemen on conservative numbers. I don't like to see us, just because we counted more does last year, so let's go harvest them. I'm not in that camp. I think we have to be very, very conservative. Our deer particularly are experience a lot of issues, and if you don't have mamas, you can't raise babies. So I'd go real slow. I want to give our professionals the tools they need, but I really caution on having too many doe tags out there.
So do we have general, I tend to agree, do we have general consensus around the ask of staff to, when you do bring numbers, that they be on the conservative side? I know this vote is just the regulation change to add the code, but.
We'll look at those numbers in May.
Okay.
So, but I'm just supporting what these gentlemen say. Let's be careful when we're hunting does.
I'm seeing nodding heads, so I think that's the message getting delivered. Okay. All right, so the motion is on the floor, or no, I'm sorry.
Motion to adapt staff's recommendation on the hunt codes.
Motion made by Commissioner Bray. Is there a second? Second by Commissioner Vigil. Voice vote. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you, Krista.
Great, thank you. We'll move on to elk then.
Yes, that'd be great. I do want to make sure that
Okay.
we can get through that.
The first change you'll see is adding GMU 591 to the list of elk antler point restricted units. That is on page 116. Then we have removing the elk 4-point antler restriction for all San Luis Valley game damage hunt codes, also on page 116. Then we have the creation of limited sex-specific, so limited bull and limited cow licenses for archery elk hunting in E16, E24, E30, and E31. You'll find that on pages 116 through 118. Moving on, we have limiting second and third rifle elk seasons in GMU 83. You'll find that on page 124 and also page 142. We have converting certain antlered elk hunt codes in E2 to either sex elk hunt codes and creating a separate hunt code for GMU 214. You'll find those changes on page 127, 143, and 149. Moving on, we have removing the GMU boundary split for the antlerless elk in the second, third, and fourth rifle seasons in GMU 521 and updating the applicable hunt codes. You'll find those changes on page 146. Then we have extending the closing date for the private land only antlerless elk hunt in GMUs 3, 4, 5, 301, and 441 to December 31st, and removing Unit 201 from the hunt code EF003P5R, and removing GMU 441 from the hunt code EF014P5R, which is on pages 149 and 152. Excuse me. And we have removing the private land only either sex elk hunt code in GMU 38, which you can find on page 160. Adding a private land only late antlerless elk season in GMU 42 on page 161. Separating GMUs 59 and 581 for private land only antlerless elk codes in E23 on pages 166, 179, and 180. We have expanding the Rabbit Mountain antlerless elk hunt code EF020L3R, expanding that boundary. You'll see those changes on page 183. We have increasing the late antlerless elk code season length in the Jefferson County portion of GMU 38 to September 1st to January 31st. You'll find that change on page 184. Those are all of the elk changes I have for you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Do we want to have commission comments, discussion, or should we go straight to public comment? Do we have any commission comments right away? Okay, let's start with public comment, and then we can go from there. Suzanne O'Neill with Colorado Wildlife Federation. Welcome, Suzanne. Thank you for being here.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, Executive Director, Suzanne O'Neill, Colorado Wildlife Federation. I believe you have our comment letter in your packet regarding elk DAUs 16, 24, 30, and 31. We strongly urge limited for cows and bulls. We believe that herd health is paramount. And we also think that CPW, as they continue their research and monitoring, that they will come back to the commission when they believe that the situation warrants an adjustment from limited and limited. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Suzanne. Any questions or comments? Thank you for your letter and for your comments. Jody Lehman, would you like to speak again? I don't know if she was able to stay. Ms. Lehman, are you here? Okay, I think she maybe made the comments she said she'd like to make, but we'll set her aside. Jennifer Burby with Colorado Outfitters Association. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you all for your time. We know how much time it takes. I thought I'd spend a little bit of time and introduce you to our association, or reintroduce some of you to our association. We have businesses throughout the state who offer hunting, fishing, and recreational services to the public. Private, public land, any gambit of services you can think of, we probably have somebody who offers them. I'm the sitting president this year, and with our eyes on the long-term goal of a healthy, sustainable herd, we do support limiting licenses. We do suggest, and it might be more publicly palatable to some, that you consider over-the-counter with caps with an early release and sales date. Puts everybody on equal footing, still allows you to adjust numbers as necessary, and allows our hunting public to plan their hunts, know they have a tag, and, or if they don't get a tag, plan accordingly and still be able to fulfill what they want to be doing. Mostly we support healthy and sustainable herds in the long term, and thank you again for all your time.
Thank you for your comments, for your suggestion. Any questions or follow-up? Okay. Kent Ingram. I thought I saw Kent. Kent, sorry, I did not project my voice very well. Welcome, Mr. Ingram.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Director, Commissioners. I'm testifying today as a sportsman. That's all I've ever been, over the years. Colorado used to be, years ago, a deer state. We weren't very good on elk. We didn't have a lot of elk. And then all of a sudden things changed. We became, the hot commodity became elk. And that's the way it's been up till now. We're starting to see challenges with both of these species. We have CWD on deer. We have elk that have challenges population-wise, if not statewide, then certainly within certain DAUs and GMUs. I think, as a sportsman, and believe me, we look forward to the draws. We look forward to every single year we can hunt. But I think sportsmen need to embody the fact that they may need to change. We may need to change in terms of where we hunt, when we hunt, and how we hunt, because the resource always comes first. And that's my testimony today. These proposed changes, at least as it relate to the 4 DAUs going limited on cows and bulls, are not statewide. They're in units that we've had serious elk reductions. And the reasons for such are still being determined, but the bottom line is that the elk populations are down. We as hunters need to embody that as much as we maybe are used to hunting where we've hunted for years, but that, folks, needs to change. That's my testimony today. Thanks.
Thank you, Kent. Any questions or conversation for Kent? All right, Bill Canterbury. Thank you, Mr. Canterbury. Welcome again.
Thank you. Welcome, commissioners, director, and Madam Chair. Representing the Cattlemen's Association on this issue, I was in Telluride this summer talking about the, statewide limited archery, and the cattlemen supported that, unanimously at our meetings. If we were to back up 20 years, the cattlemen would be here today saying, no way. Even 10 years back, and even 5 years back, they would have been saying, kill every elk on the planet. And just about 3 years ago, they've been watching in their backyards, and the number of elk is going down. Our elk herd, there's some units that's not true, but statewide, our elk population is declining. So they're in support of limiting license, and in this case here, it's not statewide, but we're still supporting that.
Thank you for your comments. Any questions? Okay. Mia Anstein with Four Corners SCI. And please correct me if I mispronounced your name.
I did good on the first name.
How do you say your last name?
My last name is Anstein.
Anstein.
Yeah. Thank you for having me up here, Chairman Zimmerman, Director Prenslow, and all the commissioners. I'm happy to be here before you today. As I said, Mia Anstein. I'm from Southwest Colorado, and I am an outdoor rider. I try to inspire other people to get outside, hunt, fish, shoot, and recreate. I'm also a regional representative for Safari Club International, and I am a board member for the Four Corners chapter down in Southwest Colorado. The Four Corners chapter has agreed that archery elk licenses should be limited in some capacity in our area, and specifically 31. As an avid hunter, I personally use a variety of means of take. I have an affinity toward archery. I enjoy it quite a bit. I love the connection out there. I've also encouraged a lot of other people to get outside and bow hunt. I've been published in bow hunting magazines. We also have members of our chapter that have the same affinity. We have outfitters, we have archers, and we have non-hunters in our chapter. But it's not about archery hunting, it's about the elk. And so today we wanted to ask you to please support this measure with an increased number of people, homes, vehicles, and so forth. We feel that hunters aren't the main impact on this decline, but it is the only thing you guys can control. So we wanted to reference back in 1990. In the 90s, E31 had an average number of archery hunters of 300. This past year, there were 3,000 in that area. So that's a significant increase. And while we would like to say that we want a guaranteed archery elk hunt every year, what we really want is for the elk to thrive so that hunters for generations to come can have the same possibilities that we have had, the same opportunities. So on behalf of the Four Corners chapter and the members, we support making changes that will reduce the amount of pressure on the elk in our area.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Anstein? Thank you. Okay, Steve Hildy with Colorado Bow Hunters Association. Welcome, Mr. Hildy.
Thank you, Chairman Zimmerman, Commissioners, Director Prenslow. Appreciate the time today. I am here to speak specifically about the Southwest Elk issue paper. Our position is we support alternative 3 with no unique hunt codes added to it. This is a huge impact on the archery community. If you look at it statewide, we have about 35,000 bow hunters for elk who participate in over-the-counter hunting. As you look at these 4 DAUs, including E16, it's about 6,300 hunters. It's 18%, and the impact of this change will be forever felt. I know some guys say, let's get the elk herd back, and we're supportive of that, definitely, but we never seem to move back to over-the-counter type hunting opportunities. In Ray, I believe 21 bow hunters had testified out of the 6,300 that asked for these units to go limited. I understand you received more public input since the Ray meeting, and I understand a majority of those favor Alternative 3. Some of that feedback was animated, perhaps divisive and uninspired or mean-spirited. And so certainly I regret that, and I apologize for that, specifically to you, Commissioner Garcia. But we do publicize, and we try to keep our members informed and give them chances to comment when it's appropriate. I did send out a broadcast email to our membership, and I tried to ask them to be respectful and to stick together, because as hunters, we all need to stick together. But this particular issue leads to division because we just seem to be talking about archery here. As you look at the biology of this issue, all 3 of these alternatives are good biological solutions. Archers will be limited in cow take in all 3 of the scenarios. The next question that you would have is, what's fair? Because part of this issue paper is, well, what is fair? Our archers' disproportionate take of cow hunting was on the increase as our participation increased. And so certainly as we look at fairness, that's the difficult question. While there's 15,000 rifle hunters, there's 6,300 archers. The biological piece of this in terms of harvest is that archers have a 3% success rate on cows, while some of the data that I sent to you suggests the rifle cow take has a 54% harvest rate. So as you look at fairness, one thing to consider too is displacement of hunters when we go limited. Now I know there was discussion in Ray, the quota should be ample, guys may not be displaced, but what you got to realize, I talked to a guy, he had 4 preference points. He hunts in unit 711. He will not apply for that as a first choice. Maybe guys get those tags as second choice, but we believe there will be a number of folks that are displaced from hunting in these units. And again, the question is, where are they going to go? I heard hunting's going to get better. I'm not sure if that's abundance of elk or bull maturity, but I can tell you if guys leave, hunting will get worse for 85% of our bow hunters. So as you consider this, we're not saying limit rifle hunters. We're just saying we'd like parity with rifle hunters. 23 of our GMUs will go limited, while rifle hunters remain totally unlimited in the second and third in those units. Additionally, if we go limited, rifle hunters will have the opportunity and freedom to move in the OTC system, while we do not. And again, our participation is fairly limited compared to those rifle hunters out there. So I thank you very much for your time. Again, ask you to support Alternative 3 with no unique hunt codes.
Thank you, Mr. Hildy. Any discussion from staff or from commission or response from staff or any follow-up? Commissioner Blecka.
Since Steve, you brought it up, the responses coming towards Director Commissioner Garcia, they also named staff. There was some correspondence that called out staff, and I feel that's inappropriate. So when people needed to direct their questions or their anger, I suggest that you come to me or somebody on the commission and not towards our staff, please.
Yeah, I didn't mention
Thank you.
Staff. Thank you.
I'm just letting you guys know.
Yeah.
All right, any additional discussion, any additional public comment on this item that did not fill out a blue slip but would like to make comment? Mr. Phelps. Sorta, kinda. You seem uncommitted.
Combined both on my blue slip, I apologize. Once again.
Oh,
Brett,
did you? I apologize. Yes, I do have your blue slip as well as yours,
And
Steve.
it's hard to read. I'd like to speak as an archer and an archer who hunts in limited archery units that are not limited during the rifle season, quote the Gunnison Basin. There was a lot of, when the Gunnison Basin limited archery, we went through a lot of the same talking, same concern. I want to sit here debating 10 years later, how many years later, it is a much better archery hunt for Brad, okay, locally having limited archery. What it kind of eliminates, when you get these archers down to one specific GMU, it's the cherry picking that went on prior to that. Prior to that, I would hunt one little section of 54 that was great, a section of 55, my favorite, a section of 551, another one of my favorites. Now when I apply, I got to pick a unit and stay there. By doing that, it has helped with the elk distribution in the Gunnison Valley as far as moving them into hellholes where they're don't get harvested or onto private land. I do think that, ma'am, I got to plagiarize your seepage comment. You know, Front Range people seeping to the west slope. I love that. We're seeing our big game herds more and more inundated by everyday intrusion into their territory. I think that rather than going statewide limited, which I've always been a big fan of, I think tool in the toolbox, we're going to be looking with a lot of over-the-counter with caps for second and third rifle hunt. I'm just here to say that bow hunters can be very hard to please. I would like to thank this commission as a bow hunter. The September 2nd to September 30 archery season is an absolute governor's tag for me personally. Thank you for the new 5-year season structure. And limiting the archery elk license in Gunnison has helped the elk and the elk hunting in the Gunnison Basin. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps. Commissioner Haskett.
Thank you. I actually have a question for you. So I thank you for coming. And I understand that 54 and 55 were changed in 2010 because of the request of the locals there. And you hunt there now. When I look at it, I wanted people to know that it's not the end of the world. You can still hunt. You can draw with 0 points at 97 and 99% results. I think that's great. So to the ones who have concern, you can still hunt. And I don't think that just because it goes draw, it means that you can't. And you're an example for that.
You can still hunt. You can accumulate preference points.
Well,
You know, but if you're, you know, like a unit, first choice, you get to hunt September 2nd to September 30th.
Okay. Krista, I think you're back up. So the motion here doesn't,
I think we
I'm a little
take-
confused by the motion.
I think we can take the whole regulations and seasons for elk motion. I think that would be okay, unless you want to split it out and
So go back to the other,
or
to the
yeah,
first page.
Just is there a motion to adopt the proposed regulations and season dates for elk?
It is, but it doesn't have the alternatives. It just says the proposed. Does that mean it's the recommended, the staff recommended alternative? Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure I
Yeah,
was
thank
clear
you.
on
Yeah.
what we were voting on.
Before we go,
Commissioner Behill.
I'd like a comment. I don't live in those DAUs, E30 and E31, but I'm in E33, which is not very far away on the Colorado-New Mexico border. And I've seen a crash of elk in the last 3 or 4 years. I'm just amazed when I look out of my house towards my hay fields and a south facing slope that faces me, and there is not a single elk track there. When 5 years ago, there was no snow left because herds of elk were coming down into my hay fields. So the herds are crashing, and not just in these areas, but in a lot of different places. I just want to make that comment before we go, before we vote.
Thank you. Commissioner Hauser and then Commissioner Garcia.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm not sure if this is the right time to ask this question and who would answer it, but just recognizing all the public comment we got on this. I mean, we got flooded with emails. A particular theme was equity between rifle and archery forms of, and so it would be helpful to hear the science or the reasoning behind sort of those stakeholder groups or those constituent groups and the methodology behind the recommendation. I'd like to hear it. If we've heard it, I'd like to hear it again.
Thank you, Commissioner Hauser. I think I'm going to call up some of our local experts. Regional Manager
Thank you.
Korychik.
Afternoon, Commissioners, Madam Chair, Directors. Korychik, Southwest Region Manager. The science behind this was really pushed through the big game season structure to where we were looking specifically at archery. I mean, could this be extrapolated or also addressed within that second and third rifle? Yes, it always could, but this was specifically related to the BGS through the archery seasons.
Does that, Commissioner Hauser?
I don't know.
I'm sorry if
Thanks,
I didn't
Madam
answer
Chair.
your question.
You know, I still just generally sort of the kind of philosophical pushback we got on sort of two branches of sort of hunters and their form of hunting, and equity sort of across the board on were archery hunters being sort of picked on, or, you know, and at the expense of rifle hunters. I'd just like to hear a little bit about sort of what went into that, and recognize that we've talked about this at other meetings, but given the flood of public comment we got on this, it would be helpful to hear the rationale and help us walk through that.
Okay, and I may need help on some of the big game season structure discussion, but even if you look back in the history as far as equity, as these populations crashed, you know, both the field and the biologist made decisions and directions on decreasing of cow harvest to the extent that the majority of that, up to about 75% of the cow licenses, were removed from muzzleloader and rifle seasons. So it was more of how much more can you impact that, and again, from the biological standpoint, that's why we made the change to limited sex specific on the archery, and then not hearing the same response from second and third rifle hunters about overcrowding. What we were hearing through the big game season structure was related specifically to archery, if that answers your question more.
Director Prenzel also had some comments. I don't know if you want to.
Oh, go ahead first.
Okay.
I might just add to that. That's a great question, but it's a very broad question on equity between seasons and dates and method of take. I'll hit a couple just real broad examples. Rifle hunting cow elk has always been limited, and archery hunting, it's been unlimited over the counter. That's obviously a change here. So there's been a disparity that way. Rifle hunters have been effective, and so cows have always been limited in that regard. Muzzleloaders is a limited tag, not an unlimited tag. So that's one kind of thing. There's and maybe Commissioner Haskett can talk about it. Just as an example, in the White River years ago, when there was lots of elk getting, Mr. Phelps brought it up, elk were getting moved early in the seasons, so limited archery season, but it's still an over-the-counter in second and third season, but first season is limited for rifle and fourth season is limited for rifle. So it's what I would call tools in the toolbox, lots of different menus, and this one's zoning in specifically on that one, trying to adjust. The cows are already limited in these units for rifle, and so one of the bigger discussions in all this, I'm sure in your cornucopia of emails, is that you could leave it unlimited bull and limited cow. That is an option. That was in E16. That's still a tool potentially in the toolbox. That wasn't the recommendation for this unit due to elk numbers, so it was bull and cow.
Commissioner Haskett, and then I was going to say, Commissioner Hauser, do you want to respond first, or?
Well, Commissioner Haskett may address this as well, but
Okay.
I just felt like we needed sort of on the record a response, given sort of the volume and the sort of the theme that was pretty prevalent in at least the email that came to me. I suspect it came to everyone. So thank you for putting that in the record and responding.
Commissioner Haskett.
Director Prenslow did hit on the cow. So rifle hunters have had a draw for cow licenses for a long time, but there's a couple other things. Archery is during the rut, and they also get to hunt for an entire month, and rifle hunters hunt for well, I don't know what our longest season is now, 9 days, 11 days. Most of them are 5 days, so there's a big difference there. It's different times of year. You can't really say this is equal to this, but I think the biggest thing we need to remember is we're here to manage the wildlife, and we need tools, and we're trying to give the tools and see how it works. In the White River herd, it was proven that during archery season, the archers push those animals onto private land and out. And that doesn't help us in the end either, because then we don't get a harvest for the rifle seasons or the archery season. So, and things are changing on the landscape. We're definitely seeing a decrease in our herd, so we've got to start somewhere.
Commissioner Adams, and then Commissioner Bray.
As a budding hunter, I would like to say that I have more of enjoy these moments where I don't know as much as I will soon. But the bit I do know is that archery is a less effective form of take. So I also just want to remind folks that equity is not equality, which means that we're not asking necessarily for the same numbers of archery versus rifle. So I think this also speaks to the comment that I made earlier around revisiting the way that we're doing our herd management planning. Talking about archery over here, and then talking about muzzleloaders over there, and then talking about rifles over there. It just seems like a very disconnected conversation, and in all of them, the result is the elk herd is declining. So, I think what can we do on the communication front, going back to what the Commissioner Fletcher said earlier today, how are we communicating to the public the decline in the elk herd, and how are we communicating that everyone is going to take a hit, and not just the archery folks or the muzzleloaders or the folks who are dealing with rifles as well. So I think there's a couple of different opportunities as we look to May, when that conversation starts, to restructure how we're doing that, both regionally as well as the different forms of take. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams. Commissioner Bray.
Yeah, thank you. I'm trying to respond a little bit to Commissioner Hauser's question, because I think it goes, there's a perceived fairness issue here, I guess, is for lack of a better word. And I want to point out, at least in my mind, we're talking about two different things. Archery bull and rifle bull, they're really two different things. But at the same time, I think this will start the conversation as to where we're going with our unlimited over-the-counter elk units, because I think you're going to start seeing the same social issue. That limiting the bull in these archery hunters is largely due to the social problems we're facing down there, overcrowding. And also, archery, the month of September is a beautiful month. Every outdoor enthusiast in the world's out there. There's still that issue during rifle hunts, but not to the degree after school starts, a lot of that. So we're kind of trying to compare apples and oranges here, which is not very good. But to your point, Commissioner Hauser, we are going to have to probably start taking a look at our over-the-counter elk units and where that goes. But this isn't the time nor the place to have that conversation right this minute. But we can start thinking about how we want to have that. Because if you think this one's contentious, wait till that one comes up. So, just my 2 cents.
Thank you, Commissioner Bray. Any other questions, comments? Are we ready to take a vote? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Corey.
I think Madam Chair, if I may suggest, it might be clearer, just for the record, if we take a vote on this specific topic first. So perhaps you could make a motion just to adopt the regulations to create limited sex-specific licenses for archery elk hunting in E16, E24, E30, and E31.
As recommended by staff.
As recommended by staff.
Okay. Moved by Commissioner Haskett, second by Commissioner Vehil. Let's do a roll call, Laura, if you don't mind.
Adams,
Yes.
Flecka,
Yes.
Gray,
Yes.
Garcia,
Yes.
Haskett,
Yes.
Hauser,
Yes.
McDaniel is absent, Schaefer,
Yes.
Vardy,
Yes.
Behill,
Yes.
Chair Zimmerman,
Yes.
motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. And then is there a motion to adopt the proposed regulations, the edits to the regs, and season dates for elk? That's a separate, well, it'll be logged as a separate vote.
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Vehil, second by Commissioner Haskett. We'll do a voice vote. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you, Krista. We are on to pronghorn moose, and then the administrative changes, and we got about an hour to make up. Let's go.
Okay. All right. Pronghorn is very easy. We have just extended the late doe pronghorn season in GMUs 9 and 191 to the end of January. You can find that change on page 196. That's all I have for pronghorn.
Okay. Any public comment specific to pronghorn? Commissioner discussion? Okay. Thank you, everyone, for your time, your public comments, and for making the time to join us today. All right, is there a motion to adopt proposed regulations and season dates for pronghorn?
So moved.
So moved by Commissioner Schaefer. Second?
Second.
Commissioner Garcia, we can do a voice call vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
All right. Moving on to moose. The first change you'll see is separating GMUs 50 and 501 from current moose hunt codes and creating a new moose hunt code that includes GMUs 50, 51, 59, 511, and 581. You can find those changes on page 202, 203, and 215. Next, you'll find adding archery, muzzleloader, and rifle antlerless moose hunt codes east of the Peak-to-Peak Highway in GMU 38. That change is found on page 203. Next, we have separating GMUs 361 from GMU 36 for antlered hunt codes and creating antlerless moose hunt codes for both units, page 203 and 215. Then we have creating antlerless moose licenses for GMU 76. It's on page 204. And finally, converting the antlered moose license in GMU 65 to an either sex license. That's on page 215. Those are all the proposed changes I have for moose.
Thank you, Krista. Any public comment related to the changes in regs for moose? Commissioner discussion? Okay. Is there a motion to adopt proposed regulations related to season dates for moose?
So moved. Second.
Commissioner Garcia and Commissioner Schaefer, thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thanks, Krista. Administrative changes.
Sure, yeah. And finally, as Commissioner Garcia pointed out, there are a number of small administrative cleanups throughout the chapter related to things that are, have been omitted from last year or typos, things like that. And so I think we do need you all to approve those changes as well.
Okay, I don't think there's going to be any public comment or discussion on that. Is there a motion to adopt all other annual changes to Chapter W2 not previously voted on, including but not limited to administrative changes as proposed by staff?
Yes.
Commissioner Vehil, second.
Second.
Commissioner Schaefer, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay. Krista, thank you. The next agenda item is 13. Jeff, I think we're going to try to move that to maybe tomorrow, Species Conservation Trust? Or do you want to try to talk about that now? Let's go.
Okay, you can start. Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, we're on in your agenda, item 13. Time-wise, we're ready to start item 19, so I will be brief. Each year, I come before you with a proposal to approve funding as requested by DNR. There'll become a bill in the legislative session to fund conservation work for species of concern, state or federally listed threatened species, candidate species, and so forth. So the memo is fairly explanatory. Basically, we have our categories we have two categories of funding. Together, they equate to up to $2 million. How much money is actually available depends on how severance tax revenues come into the state, and this is a portion of that that goes to this program. Water Conservation Board also has a similar proposal before their board to fund South Platte River recovery and selenium issues on the west slope. So basically, you can see the aquatic ones are in more detail. The terrestrial ones, it's kind of a catch-all. About 80% of the money earmarked for the terrestrial project in the coming legislative session would be for two species. Gunnison Sage-Grouse, as you know, the Fish and Wildlife Service is working on a recovery plan. We would like to have monies available to help us implement the highest priority recovery actions once that plan is finalized. The second species is a black rail, which most people are not familiar with. It's a small, secretive marsh bird that lives primarily on the Gulf and Atlantic coast of this country, although there are some interior populations. One of those is in southeastern Colorado. It was proposed to be listed by the Fish and Wildlife Service as threatened in 2018. They have yet to issue a final rule. We would like to get more information on this species to help inform their listing decision. We did a little bit of work with this money in 2018 and 19 and found that there appears to be a fairly robust population along the Arkansas River in the cattail habitats, and we'd like to learn more about whether they're breeding there and recruiting into the population, and this funding source will help us do that.
Thank you. We can now list speed talking to your long list of skills and abilities.
I've been training under Justin Rudder. So.
Appreciate any questions or comments. Commissioner Garcia.
I know you wanted to be brief, but you got all dressed up, so I'm just curious. It says in the very beginning here, and just help me here, that recommendation is to forward a statement of concurrence to CWCB. Could you tell me what that means?
Yeah, because the bill that will eventually be introduced includes $4 million of funding, $2 million of which is earmarked for the Water Conservation Board and $2 million for projects that CPW staff undertake. And so we want to let the board know that this body is supporting our recommendations, and then we'll forward that on to DNR. And the Water Conservation Board meets later this month, and they'll do the same. So it's just a reciprocal, keeping them informed. Hopefully we're all on the same page.
And second is, could you just help me? I wasn't the cutthroat trout disease. Is this something I need to be worried about?
As a person interested in fish conservation or a person who consumes fish? No, human health, you don't have to worry about it.
No, but
there are bacterial kidney disease is one of the things that we're wanting to spend money on. Of course, you know, whirling disease is something we've been dealing with for quite some time. So it's sort of, there are a number of disease-related projects on the aquatic side that this will help fund, but bacterial kidney disease or BKD in salmonids, which includes trout, is one of the priorities, and it's an issue primarily in hatchery production, and so trying to get at ways to manage that disease.
Commissioner Adams.
Thank you. Briefly, I look forward to the agenda item on research overview. I just feel in general that I don't have a good handle on our research agenda as an agency, specifically the prior research, how to get access to that, the current research projects that are happening, and then the proposed, and then of course the link back to our strategic plan and the strategic priorities. So just moving forward, it would just really be helpful to see how all these pieces come together. So I know that, as I mentioned, there's a research overview coming up tomorrow morning, and I look forward to getting a better opportunity to understand how does this piece fit into the larger research agenda for the agency. Thank you.
Madam Chair, do you want me to say something about that possibility tomorrow morning?
Sure.
Given where you are in your agenda today and that we reserve the right to provide you a handout, I think that's what I'm going to do in the morning, is give you a handout. The request for that presentation was focused on our elk recruitment research, our elk and recreation impact research, and on the two predator studies on the Piceance and the Arkansas. So that's really the kind of the 4 project areas that were included in that update. Be happy to send you between now and March and schedule for a future meeting a larger overview of that runs the gamut of our terrestrial and aquatic research. And I actually have a document at the printers that we would like to provide you that kind of gives you a large overview of all the research we're doing and have done since the inception of the agency, actually.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Again, it also speaks to our opportunity to share with the public what we've been doing and how we're using our funds. Thank you.
Well, sorry, I had one other follow-up question on that, but I was writing that down at the same time. Now I can't remember. Oh, that handout, because it is noticed on the agenda that it would have been a public presentation, is that handout going to be available online or some way?
Yeah, I'll have copies in the back, and it'll be a part of the archive online.
Okay, thank you. This is an action item. Any other commissioner questions or comments? Any public comment, since this is action item? Look at me, Jake, I'm getting better at it. Okay, is there a motion to accept the recommendations for the Species Conservation Trust Fund as presented by staff? Thank you, Commissioner Vihil. A second? Second. Commissioner Haskett, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Thank
Any
you.
opposed? Commissioners Vardy and Blecka, I'm sorry. I will look to the right, I promise.
We're gonna work it out.
Okay, throw something at me. I don't know. Okay, Krista, you're back up. Let's see where we can get to.
Okay, sounds good. So I believe we are on agenda item 15. We're now talking about issue identification. Agenda item 15 is chapter P7, passes, permits, and registrations, and also related provisions of chapter P1. The issue at hand is expanding the division's ability to issue special activity permits to commercial users. You'll find this on page 1. So current regulations in P7 authorize only non-commercial permits. There's a lack of regulatory authority to issue special activities permits for commercial events and activities. And this results in park managers relying on agreements or contracts to authorize the event and unnecessarily exposes CPW to claims by the organizer of the event.
Thank you.
The proposed changes to P7 and P1 would enable park managers to issue a permit regardless of whether the activity was commercial or non-commercial in nature. The proposed changes also ensure consistency between the permit appeal process and the State Administrative Procedures Act. And the draft red line version of these changes in P7 and P1 can be seen on pages 3 through 6, including a fee schedule for the Arkansas Headwaters Recreation Area on page 5. And that is all I have for you for agenda item 15.
And these are issue identifications, so we don't need to take action. Commissioner Garcia.
I'm going to direct this to Mr. Matter. Mr. Matter, I think you're the author of this. And you believe that this, does it eliminate our exposure or just dramatically decrease? You're concerned about our exposure, right?
Yes. So when the commission or division enters into a contract, you're subject to a greater statute of limitations and not protected by the Governmental Immunity Act.
Right.
Whereas when you issue a license or a permit to an individual, I think you're squarely under the Governmental Immunity Act and also have the benefit of very clear sort of appeal procedures within the State Administrative Procedures Act. So rather than entering into a contract allowing a third party to enter onto the land owned or managed by CPW, you could issue a permit, which is effectively a license, and a license merely provides the terms and conditions under which a third party can use the land of another.
Great. Thank you.
Commissioner Schaefer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Are there any current regs in regards to commercial activities or commercial sort of events at state parks? Do we need to have that corresponding to this sort of administrative change?
This piece, the existing rules contemplate the issuance of special activity permits to non-commercial users, and commercial users under existing rules are obligated to enter into a contract with the division or the commission. And I don't think there is a great deal of specificity concerning the nature of a commercial activity. In other words, these are the rules that apply if you have a commercial event with 10 people versus these are the rules that apply if you have a commercial event with 1,000 people. But I think this permit process enables the division to assess those impacts on a case-by-case basis and require the permittee to pay any study costs or mitigation associated with the commercial activity instead of foisting that burden onto the division?
Yeah, I mean, if that's the case, then great. My concern was simply by raising that there is now a commercial permitting process if there isn't the sideboards provided to allow staff to say, these are the things you need to do as part of your application. I don't know if that needs to be regulatory in nature, if it can be done as part of that permitting process itself. Whichever way, I only care about the outcome.
No, I think it's the latter. It can be on a case-by-case basis. That permit could be issued with conditions, and there's no limit on the conditions that you can impose, whether it's security or toilets or fencing, that's a case-by-case determination that would be possible under this change.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next one.
All right, moving on to item 16, which is Chapter W5, Small Game and Migratory Birds. This is, kind of salmon orange in color on your devices. This is again at issue stage. So the chapter is open for consideration of annual changes to waterfowl and migratory bird hunting seasons and related provisions, including season dates, bag and possession limits, manner of take. And so we have provided for you some proposed migratory game bird seasons for Colorado in 2020 to 2021. That's on page 1. These summary sheets show the recommended changes and proposed calendars for migratory birds to comply with the proposed federal regulation frameworks. The final frameworks will be published in January 2020. One of the major changes to note is the SCOP daily bag limit has been decreased from 3 to 2 in the Pacific Flyway and from 3 to 1 in the Central Flyway. In addition to that, we have one issue paper which proposes expanding current youth waterfowl days to also permit waterfowl hunting by veterans and active duty military members. This is on page 13. So the federal frameworks have allowed states to have 2 days of waterfowl hunting for youth hunters. And now new federal regulations allow states to have up to 2 additional days to allocate to veterans and active duty military hunters. These days could be the same for youth and veterans, and they are subtracted from the total number of season dates allowed annually. Staff proposed modifying the existing youth waterfowl hunting weekends to also allow hunting by veterans and active military, beginning with the 2020 to 2021 seasons. And that is all I have for you for agenda item 16.
Okay. Commissioner Garcia.
So I'm the quacker in the group, and so I was looking, and this is picky, but if you look at page 2, it says that if you go down the dark goose zone, what is it, Northern Front Range dark goose, it says that the number of days in between 2019 and 2020, it went from 19 days down to 12 days, but yet if you look at the calendar dates, October 3rd to 21st and October 5th to 23rd, they're the same amount of days. So it doesn't compute. And so, and then there's another one down with the light goose at the very end there, conservation order. It says 75 and 72 days, but we only shortened it by 2. So it's not a big deal, but I think if this stuff is going out to the public, I just want to make sure that the numbers are right. So maybe we could go back and take a look and make sure we've got that. And I'm not going to go through and look at, I started to look at the calendars that follow this to see if the calendars actually, all these coded calendars correspond. But unless I printed them and did it side by side, and I was already tired enough, I'm not going to go through that. Maybe it's something we could have an intern, some student or something, just kind of proofread these things to make sure that we don't have those kind of just clerical errors throughout.
Thank you for your comments. Yeah, I'm looking to my colleague.
Krista's searching. She's on the phone a friend. Ask someone in the audience.
Is there anything we need to add to that, Jim? Or okay.
Sounds like cleanup before it comes back to us for action.
Yeah, we
okay.
will make those those changes and look through that. Thank you for finding that.
And my
pointing
only
that out
real
to us.
question was, does somebody want to tell me why our scalp numbers are down?
Again, I will turn to my colleague Jim Gammonley.
The duck guy?
Thank you, Madam Commissioner, Commissioners, Director Prenslow, and Director Gibbs. I'm Jim Gammonley. I'm the Avian Research Leader for CPW. There's a continental scaup strategy, harvest strategy that's set by the flyways and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And the prescriptions each year for the bag limits and season lengths are based on updated information on scaup numbers. And it's a pretty volatile harvest strategy that the numbers bounce around quite a bit, depending on what the continental estimates of the breeding population are and the harvest each year is. The Fish and Wildlife Service and the flyways are working on trying to revise that strategy so it doesn't bounce around so much, but that's why. In that case, we're just simply adapting to the expected federal framework regulations.
I assume that. Last year we had pintails, this year it's scalp.
Right. Both of those strategies are problematic, and we're trying to work to make them a little bit more stable.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Adams.
I just had a quick question about the impact of, as a sister of someone in the active military, I'm all for increasing and expanding the opportunity to veterans in active military. However, I'm curious about the impact that has to the experience for youth. I did see that there was an additional 2 days, but just curious how you and your team thought about what data points did you use to inform this as it relates to the number of youth that are currently using it, and then the impact of or the potential of additional veterans in active military. I mean, that's a large number of people, so I'm just curious how those conversations went.
That's a good question. I guess I can just try to answer it, and then I might also turn to my colleagues again. But I don't believe that we have a whole lot of information on current participation in youth days currently, and so I think they would just be broad estimates at this point. I think we are trying to collect more information, and we also don't have interest or information on the current interest among veterans and active military personnel. So it is kind of a trial run, I think, at this point. But some anecdotal information from some other states about the interest among veterans and active duty military. But to be perfectly honest, we don't have a whole lot of information. Jim, anything you want to add to that?
Yes, that's the question, Commissioner Adams, that we're going to be trying to look at. This proposal is based on new federal legislation that just started last year. Most states didn't have time to even try and address this last season, or the season that we're in right now. One state that did was able to implement military days, and they did the same thing. This is North Dakota, did the same thing where they just added military hunters to the youth weekend that they have. North Dakota is another state that has a lot of military members in the state, a lot of active hunting military members, and they tried to put together a survey to estimate participation in harvest during the first year and kind of routed that around to the other states. One of the problems is it's hard to get a good sampling frame of active military or veterans to sample from to see whether they participated or not. And that's something that we're talking about internally to try and figure out a good way to do that. So we'll be, and North Dakota found that they had, decent participation as best as they could estimate. Not kind of overwhelming to any degree, but they certainly reported their numbers with the caveat that they didn't have a very good sampling frame to get those estimates from. So we're working on that, and I think that's, if this goes forward, if you approve this, that's something that staff will be discussing about how we can kind of look at what the participation in harvest coming from the active military and veteran hunters are.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Krista, on to agenda item 17. You get to channel Brett Ackerman and Daniel Eisenhart's former formally exemplified abilities to make up an hour.
Yeah, okay, no pressure, yeah. Yes, agenda item 17, chapter W9, wildlife properties, and also related provisions of chapter P1. So we have a number of issue papers for you, and I'll try to go through them as quickly as possible. The first one is prohibiting camping on state trust land properties for more than 14 consecutive days in a 45-day period, or leaving camp unattended for more than 48 hours. It's on page 1. CPW and the State Land Board have increasingly noticed campers occupying state trust land properties in excess of 30 days. This extended use conflicts with other uses authorized by the State Land Board and can lead to unsanitary and unsafe conditions. It's currently prohibited to leave a camp unattended for more than 48 hours and to camp for more than 14 days in a 45-day period on state wildlife areas, but existing regulations do not address unattended camps or the length of stay on state trust land properties. So staff recommend creating a regulation that prohibits leaving a camp, pitched tent, shelter, motor vehicle, or trailer unattended for more than 48 hours, or camping or parking a travel trailer or camper on any one state trust land public access program property for more than 14 days in a 45-day period. And if adopted, staff would recommend removing the references to the 14-day camping limit in the East Carter Mountain and West Carter Mountain state trust land regulations. The next issue paper is authorizing the division director to execute short-term housing leases. This is on page 3. Currently, any new housing lease for staff must go to the leadership team and to the Parks and Wildlife Commission for approval. This approval process usually takes 2 months or more and is not practical for short-term housing needs. Staff proposed changing the regulations to allow new housing leases that do not exceed 12 months be executed solely by the CPW director. The draft redline versions of these changes in chapter W9 and P1 are included on page 4 and page 5. Now we'll move on to issue papers in the Northeast region. First one is adjusting regulations related to the fishing closure at Banner Lake State Wildlife Area during waterfowl hunting seasons. This is on page 6. Currently, regulation prohibits fishing at Banner Lake's State Wildlife Area from the opening of the first regular duck season through the last day of the regular waterfowl season. However, there has been a high violation rate among anglers, especially during the month of October, and staff have found the majority of the violations is due to a lack of knowledge about the dates of the duck hunting season. So staff proposed changing the regulation to read, fishing is prohibited from October 1st to February 28th for additional clarity. Next, we have allowing night fishing during certain times of the year at Jackson Lake State Wildlife Area. It's on page 7. Jackson Lake State Wildlife Area has good fishing access, and it was a well-known night fishing destination. The public has requested night fishing be allowed again, and so staff proposed changing the regulation to read, public access is prohibited from 9 p.m. to 4 a.m. except for legal fishing activities. Next, requiring hunting reservations for weekends and holidays during the teal season and the first split of the regular duck season at Jackson Lake State Wildlife Area. This is on page 8. Waterfowl hunters are currently not required to have reservations to hunt at Jackson Lake State Wildlife Area, which results in more hunters than the available hunt areas can accommodate, regulatory violations, and public safety concerns. This is especially true during the weekends of the teal season and the first split of the regular duck season. Staff proposed changing regulations to require reservations on Saturdays, Sundays, and legal holidays to hunt waterfowl during the teal season and the first split of the regular duck season. And also to add a regulation to require waterfowl hunters to check in and out at the check station. Hunters may not check in until 4 a.m. and can only hunt the area reserved. Let's see, so moving on to the Northwest region, we have several issue papers, which you'll probably notice, which are asking to add properties to the hunter reservation system. So I'm gonna try to talk about them globally so we can save a little bit of time. So several properties you can see where we have access easements, which allow for very specific hunting opportunities. Previously, these hunting opportunities were allocated via an application system and or a random hand draw. So to simplify this process, staff is proposing adding these properties to the hunter reservation system through IPAWS. and to adopt property-specific regulations that are consistent with the access easement at each property. So in general, the regulations on these properties would state that hunting is restricted to specific species or types of animals. Hunting access is by reservation only, and reservation holders must have their confirmation letter with them while hunting on the property. Reservations may be obtained through the hunter reservation system and generally may be made up to 45 days in advance of the start of the specific season for which they are permitted to hunt on that property. To make a reservation, hunters must already possess an eligible license for a specific hunt code which is permitted on that property. Hunters may be accompanied by a limited number of people. Hunters may only access the property on the date specified on the reservation. Vehicle use is generally limited or restricted. And overnight camping, dogs, fires, fishing, woodcutting, target shooting, building permanent blinds, and gathering artifacts are prohibited on those properties. So I'll just walk through those properties really quickly for you so you can follow along. The first one is Pot Creek State Wildlife Area. This is also known as Bobcat Ranch. So CPW manages limited public access hunting on Bobcat Ranch. Currently that includes 4 cow elk hunters, which are allowed each year on that property. The next one is the Collins Mountain Ranch State Wildlife Area. So again, CPW manages a public access easement there, which allows 5 total hunters to hunt each year, including 1 antlered deer, 1 antlered elk, and 3 antlerless elk. The next one is Crooked Wash Ranch. Again, CPW has an access easement that allows 4 hunters per year. That includes 2 antlerless elk hunters during the muzzleloader season and 2 antlerless elk hunters during the first rifle season. The next one is Flanders Ranch State Wildlife Area. So you've probably heard of this one. We recently obtained an access easement there and added it as a state wildlife area. So staff would like to add big game hunting and waterfowl hunting on this property to the hunter reservation system and add property-specific regulations as I've described. The next one is the Grand Valley Area Special Archery Hunts. CPW has been operating special archery hunts in several Grand Valley Area wildlife areas, including Tillman Bishop State Wildlife Area, Orchard Mesa State Wildlife Area, and Grand Junction Wildlife Area, which in conjunction with the Bureau of Reclamation. They've been doing this since the early 2000s. So the access agreement allows for 1 hunter per week during regular archery season and 1 hunter per property for the 2nd and 3rd rifle seasons. The next one is the Louisiana Purchase Ranch. CPW obtained an access easement with the Louisiana Purchase Ranch to allow 6 hunters to access the property in the 2nd and 3rd rifle seasons each year. So 1 hunter of antlered deer, 2 hunters of antlerless deer, 1 hunter of antlered elk, and 2 hunters of antlerless elk. And the final one is Yarmany Ranch. So this is adding property-specific regulations to Yarmany Ranch State Wildlife Area. Yarmany Ranch is accessible for big game hunting through an access easement again. Hunting is restricted to a limited number of elk, moose, pronghorn hunters through a hand draw process. So staff opted not to include this one in the hunter reservation system due to its complexity. So it'll still be conducted through a hand draw process, which will be conducted at the CPW Steamboat Springs Service Center. And also to adopt property-specific regulations as required by that easement. And the final one for the Northwest region is changing the hours of operation for the Basalt State Wildlife Area Public Shooting Range. This is on page 25. The current hours for the Basalt State Wildlife Area Public Shooting Range are 7 a.m. until 7 p.m., Monday through Friday, and 9 a.m. until 5 p.m. on Saturday and Sunday. These hours are not consistent, however, with the seasonal daylight hours. And additionally, facilities and infrastructure associated with the power companies are located behind the shooting range, and staff frequently has to arrange temporary closures to ensure the safety of the power company personnel. Staff would like to create 2 sets of hours of operation and include a predictable day of closure to accommodate this maintenance. So summer hours would be from March 15th to October 14th, and they would be 7 a.m. until 7 p.m., Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, and then 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Saturday and Sunday. Winter hours would run from October 15th through March 14th and would be from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, 9 a.m. until 4 p.m. on Saturday and Sunday. Wednesday would be closed for maintenance. Those are the issue papers for the Northwest region.
Thank you, Krista. Commissioner Garcia.
I have a couple of questions for Manager Leslie. If I could, please.
I know there's a few more still in this section, Krista.
Mr. Garcia, Mark Leslie, Northeast Region Manager.
So I know that us fishermen sometimes have difficulty understanding waterfowl regs. And so I understand what you did over at Banner Lakes in trying to help us without having to understand waterfowl by just giving us February 28th as a date. But then I look, and the Jackson Lake fishermen are so much smarter that with them, they can night fish up through the dark goose season. And so I guess they understand waterfowl, or should we change that one to February 28th?
Those are both loaded questions, and I'm not sure I want to even attempt that.
But seriously, should we just
different demographic. At Banner Lakes, the ponds freeze up, you know, generally for, you know, the waterfowl season, and then it's over. But we don't want fishermen and waterfowl hunters out there at the same time, because we've got people set up on ducks, and if the ponds are still open in October and duck season's going on, we've got conflicts, which is kind of the same thing we were doing at Jackson Lake with the reservation issue. This is all stemming from inner conflicts with different users out there. So that's the reason for it.
Is there any reason that you wouldn't want to just use a set date like February 28th for Jackson Lake as well, as opposed to saying through the goose season and you have to keep?
You mean at Banner?
I mean, you did it at Banner. You
Right.
want to do it at Banner. Why not just do the same thing at Jackson is what I'm suggesting?
Well,
just have a date, February 28th.
That's workable. We could do it if you wanted to do it that way. We submitted it the way we did because we were trying to address that particular issue. So that's all.
And my bigger question
Not a
is
very
on
good answer.
Jackson Lake. I really like the idea of the reservation system, and I'm just curious why you don't want to do it all the time.
We had that discussion, and in this particular case, I'm willing to go incrementally on it, to not be so restrictive. But you know, one thing I want to keep an eye on, and I talked to Area Wildlife Manager Todd Schmidt about this, is that if we do this, I don't want fights to break out on Fridays now. You know, they may move the fist fight from Saturday and Sunday to Friday. So we're going to keep an eye on that one. I don't want to keep coming back to all of you with changes, but we thought that was better to go incrementally on it.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you. Commissioner Adams.
Thank you. As a new fisherwoman, I would like to just say that I concur with Commissioner Garcia's request of just having dates as opposed to, you know, seasonal or, you know, the current language, just for transparency and just easier access as we are going to see an increase of new anglers coming in and new participants into the outdoors persons. I think it's really critical that we try and be as user-friendly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Krista, I know you've got, I think, 3 or 4 more issue papers to get through.
Yeah, thank you. So let's see, we can move on to the Southeast region, I believe. We have just a few issue papers. The first one is permitting hunting from August 15th to the end of February at Box Creek State Trust Land. This is on page 83 in the commission version of the packet, page 27 in the public version. Seems to be an increase of pronghorn in the upper Arkansas Valley, and public is asking for the start of date of the season on Box Creek State Trust Land to begin on August 15th, which is the opening of the over-the-counter archery season. The next is establishing visitor management regulations for Tract Ranch State Trust Land, page 84 in your version, page 28. For the public. Parking has been a concern at Tract Ranch State Trust Land, where hunting pressure is high. In 2019, CPW constructed 2 additional parking areas. However, vehicles continue to park on the sides of the road, causing safety concerns and resource impacts. Staff propose updating regulations 903A 168 to prohibit access from county roads. Additionally, because the property is primarily used for pronghorn hunting, staff proposes changing the access date to August 15th to February 28th. And additionally, staff would like to see the property limited to foot access only to minimize resource impacts and require that only portable blinds be used. The final one for that region is prohibiting the discharge of firearms at Mount Chavano State Wildlife Area from the upper end of the Mount Chavano State Fishing Unit downstream to the Highway 291 bridge crossing. There's a map in your version if you're at all confused by this. So currently discharging firearms is prohibited except when hunting from the Highway 291 bridge upstream to the property boundary on the Mount Chavano State Wildlife Area. The area from the upper end of the Mount Chavano State Fish Unit downstream to the Highway 291 bridge is near a residential area. There have been some safety concerns there, so staff is proposing limiting hunting on this portion of the Mount Chavano State Wildlife Area to handheld archery equipment and falconry. We'll move on to the Southwest region. The first issue paper is shortening the Gunnison Sage-Grouse viewing season at Juanita Watchable Wildlife Area. This is page 88 in the commission version, page 32 in the public version. Juanita Watchable Wildlife Area is becoming increasingly popular for viewing Gunnison Sage-Grouse, but there have been concerns about decreased use of the traditional lek there. Birds seem to be shifting display areas and breeding activities further from the developed watchable site. A subcommittee was formed to consider the impacts and evaluate alternatives with representatives from CPW, Gunnison County, the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Forest Service, stock growers, Siskiyou, and Western Colorado University. As a preferred alternative, staff propose opening the site from April 1st to April 30th, except during the second full week of the month. This would reduce the total viewing days from 45 to 23, but provide a period of no disturbance from the wildlife site during the typical peak of breeding activity. It also allows for continued public viewing opportunity in a controlled manner. If approved, it's preferred that the regulation change be effective June 1st, 2020. The final issue paper for you in this section is requiring non-exempt boats to launch from the CPW boat ramp at Groundhog Reservoir State Wildlife Area. CPW has a perpetual access easement for public boating and fishing at Groundhog Reservoir State Wildlife Area. There have been increasing numbers of landowners launching boats from private property instead of the boat ramp. To minimize the potential of aquatic nuisance species introduction, staff propose requiring all motorized and trailered boats to launch at the CPW boat ramp there. So that is all I have for you for agenda item, what are we on now? 17? Thank you.
Well done. Commissioner Schaefer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a few comments regarding a couple things regarding the hunter reservation system on a bunch of these properties in the Northwest. I think it's a great move forward. One thing I'll call out, though, is that the access is being created through the Habitat Stamp Program, through the acquisition of easements on these properties. It'd be great to be ensure that they're all signed with the fact that the Habitat Stamp Program is what is providing access, so there is an acknowledgement that sportsmen and women dollars are going towards this access creation. Secondly, it'd be great if we could better publicize that these opportunities exist. Now, I was on the Habitat Stamp Committee when we got access on all these. I could not tell you at all until I read through the issue papers of what that access was. So I don't know if that's a case where it's in our big game brochure that there's a asterisk that says that there are additional private land opportunities, or what it may be. But being able to publicize that, I think, is a key to, one, having a good utilization of the properties, but also continued support behind this Habitat Stamp Program. Moving on the Juanita Watchable Wildlife, I think this is a great move. However, I would also like to see an actual trigger, adaptive management trigger regarding closure. At what point are high male counts is the response to close watchable wildlife programs there? And I understand, the stuff that Dr. McGee has been doing down there for decades, as well as the robust coalition of stakeholders that have been working on this. But this is something that from my own experience running grouse tours over the years, there is an impact from running those tours. And we have to be able to agree upon a place where maybe it needs a full-scale rest. And then on the last comment, understand that the Montezuma Valley Irrigation Company is the owner of Groundhog Reservoir. I'm just wondering if there's a middle ground approach where private property owners aren't told that they can't do something on their property. If there's a way to be able to get ANS inspection, but not requiring them to not be able to utilize their own property for launching. I'm not an authority by any means on this topic, but it does seem like that's a way to create some controversy.
Yeah, we can look into those issues for you. I don't know right off the top of my head.
Sounds like there'll be a little follow-up. Thank you, Commissioner Schaefer. Commissioner Hauser.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And this concerns the Basalt shooting range hours, so I don't know whether that's JT or Matt. First of all, I just want to say thank you. I recognize this has been a monumental exercise following the Lake Christine fire. It seems on its face that this is a great sort of compromise and move forward closer to Cameo and the opportunity to take advantage of daylight and changing seasons. The day off for maintenance work seems to make a whole lot of sense. So on its face, this seems like a great improvement. I guess my question to you both is, what are you hearing locally? Sort of what are the next steps? How might we test this? You know, is it a sort of a test period to see how this goes? Do we come back to if it doesn't work? And then sort of can you describe sort of what the long-term continued conversations with the community regarding the range might be? I assume this isn't sort of we zip it up with a bow and this is the end of the discussion. So thanks.
Great question. JT Ramatsky, Northwest Regional Manager, Commissioner Hauser, and all the commissioners. One, thanks for the support on this, and it wouldn't have been done without the staff locally. Matt Yamashita is here as well, so we can get into some specifics if you'd like. As you know, we had the task force. We moved through a lot of processes. Since the last couple meetings of the commission, we've also had an opportunity to sit down with the mayor and with the town manager and a few of the council folks up there in the town. I think we've had some very productive conversations. Matt has also committed to meet with them continually, one-on-one, for at least once a month. They're going to start developing a strategic plan, if you will, about their community and about their neighbors, which we're one of the largest, and they acknowledge some of our constraints and also some of our needs. And so I think we've hugely moved that needle, most part because of Matt and his staff. There's going to be continual work that needs to be done here. Nothing is in stone, I'll say. I think this is best to be left as adaptive management through time, and we're going to continue to work and engage with the task force group, look at other ways to ameliorate noise, and we're still looking at lead and other things out there. We're looking at alternative locations, so all those bigger, broader things are also still ongoing. Just really quickly, I want to give Matt a second to talk because I'm sure he may have a couple other things if you don't mind, so I'll ask Matt to chat real quick.
Thanks, JT. Commissioner Hauser, Madam Chair, Directors, Commissioners, appreciate the support. Just as JT had mentioned, just to address the specific question, as JT mentioned that me and my staff have been meeting with town council, with Basalt town managers for at least once a month. We propose to do that continuing forward, and part of that process is with the understanding there's not a single answer that will fit everybody's needs in this kind of a situation. So we're hoping to stay openly engaged throughout this process, you know, part of that transparency and trying to achieve, you know, compromises where we can, but both recognizing that we have certain objectives that will need to be accomplished. So we're hoping that throughout this open line of communication, that as we present papers like this, as we make changes and we start addressing topics of concern, that people understand we are working, it's not an arbitrary decision made by one entity or the other, that we're doing this collaboratively, collectively, well thought out, well proposed, so that we can move toward some sort of a productive solution in the future. We as staff have already, for the next 2 to 3 years, have already delineated a number of projects on the property that will help address some of the concerns that have been raised, both as a result of just the shooting range being in close proximity to a municipality and in addition to the aftermath of the Lake Christine fire. Further, beyond that, we haven't dismissed the proposition established by some of the citizens to look at alternative range sites. So that's something where we're continuing to stay engaged with both the task force that was convened in 2018 and also with the municipality, with the town of Basalt, in order to look at items as they become available, just to dive into them, see if there is anything that potentially may come around. It's one of those projects that we'll handle on a case-by-case basis, and we're still open to suggestions is what it comes down to.
Just quick follow-up. The lack of or the absence of calls or emails about this prior to this meeting would suggest a couple of things. Perhaps this outline is generally acceptable or has been presented as a solid compromise in the community. So just could like to hear a little bit about that. And then secondarily, how will it be shared more broadly, given a pretty attentive couple of newspapers and media in the Roaring Fork Valley? I also would wonder how we take advantage of the opportunity to get out in front of this from a public relations standpoint and to tell that story. I don't know if Commissioner Vardy has heard anything either. The absence of information, I think sometimes the vacuum will take over. So the opportunity as the stakeholders in that community understand that this has really been an exercise of finding a good compromise, which to me, this is a big movement. So how do we do that, and sort of what's the plan?
As of right now, that's a good question. And right now, I think the basis for a lot of the silence has been our continued engagement with a lot of the entities that have had raised prior concerns and addressing that directly with them. As far as moving forward, this speaks to both sides of the coin. Throughout the whole process, we've kind of vowed to and continue to vow to maintain open lines of communication to all the different stakeholders that have been brought up, have raised their hands and shown that they have some interest in what we're doing. So we've been reaching out and speaking with them directly. We're going to continue to do that. Moving forward, I think in your packets there's some documents to show what thought process was going into this. Obviously, we want to highlight that there was a lot of thought behind this, and there's just good justification for why it's being proposed. It's not just because it felt good or felt right at a certain time. So that's part of the message that we're wanting to articulate and move forward. You're correct, Commissioner Hauser, that there are a lot of local media entities that are paying very close attention to any decisions being made regarding the shooting range and what staff or what the agency is proposing to do with the range. It's something that we would like to remain transparent in that regard. Locally in the Roaring Fork Valley, the communities that are going to be affected, they rely very heavily on printed media for whatever it may be. So we'll obviously be looking to reach out to them, and as this kind of continues to move along, utilize them as a resource to our benefit in getting word out to those communities and making sure that people understand where we've been, where we are, and where we plan to go.
Thanks. Just sort of one maybe final underscore in that often it's the folks that are at the table, and I think what your comment about sort of the silence says a lot about those that have been at the table. I would certainly underscore the broader communication around this, because folks that even don't use the shooting range were part of that valley when that fire was pretty evident all across that region. So you'd want sort of folks on the same page, whether or not they're in Newcastle or they're in Aspen or whatever, at the appropriate time when you're ready to do that. Certainly that media relations, I think, could come back and reap good benefits. So thank you.
Thank you. Shows that definite commitment by the agency to stay involved in such a big issue. So thank you, and I will add my agreement to Commissioner Hauser to make sure that we get that message out there to the community, to the entire valley. Thanks so much for all your work on that. So just a little agenda update, little agenda check-in. Since we are a bit behind, we're going to move agenda items 19 and 22 until tomorrow. Krista, I do want to cover 18 now, and then we will go to break, if that's right with Katie. And then we'll start with items 20 and 21 right after break. If that works for everyone. Clear as mud. All right, Krista, agenda item 18.
Great, thank you. I'll try to be quick. Agenda item 18 is related to Chapter W16, which is the Parks and Wildlife Procedural Rules. This is pink in color on your devices. And this involves revising the process by which the division and commission respond to citizen petitions for rulemaking. So current regulations related to citizen petitions, which you can find on page 3 of your packet, generally prompt staff to file a rulemaking notice with the Secretary of State if a complete citizen petition for rulemaking is filed on time. This presumes the commission will want to consider making regulatory changes and obligates the staff to analyze the petition without the benefit of any direction from the commission. In addition, current regulations grant citizen petitioners the opportunity to make oral presentations to the commission, which may not be necessary in all circumstances and somewhat limit CPW's ability to manage commission meeting agendas. Staff propose adopting regulations similar to other natural resource departments, which does not put a strict timeline on when citizen petitions would be noticed for rulemaking and does not automatically grant citizen petitioners the opportunity to make an oral presentation to the commission concerning their petition. However, citizens always have that right during public comment. The amendments suggested are intended to maximize CPW's flexibility in responding to citizen petitions while retaining the public's ability to bring forward proposed regulatory changes. These changes may necessitate a revision to the Commission's July 7th, 2016 public rulemaking petitions policy, the current version of which is included in your materials on page 4. We've also included a brief summary of several other departments and how they deal with citizen petitions for your reference on page 7. And I'd like to turn it over to Jake at this point for more information about this issue.
So this issue paper relates to discussion that was held in Ray. Director Prenslow mentioned that he was going to reevaluate the citizen petition process, and we've been working on this. Tomorrow, we have an executive session to discuss this in detail. I wanted to update the commission on some recent case law update and related issues, and it's really meant to maximize efficiency and address some of the concerns I have, so I hope that we can have a discussion tomorrow in executive session on that topic.
Sounds good. Thank you. Commissioner Garcia.
Mr. Matter, could you make available to at least me Rule 529? I don't.
Sure.
Great. We do have one public comment on this item. Krista, is that all right? Are we ready to go to public comment? Okay. Andy Treehorn, are you here? Right. Congressional Sportsman Foundation. Thanks, Andy. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. Andy Treehorn with the Congressional Sportsman's Foundation. I have one brief comment for your consideration as you work through this process. I believe existing statutes under 246402 require only 24 hours of notice for a meeting to consider public business or formal actions. And to the Commission's credit and staff's credit, this body has always been pretty good about giving 10 days notice with agendas for Commission meetings. Given the predictable rulemaking cycle that you all use and when regulations come up in a pretty predictable fashion, it seems like there's ample opportunity for the public to plan on when they might want to attend a Commission meeting. However, given that the nature of these citizen rulemaking petitions is fairly unpredictable, I think there are some concerns that I've heard and that I share about the ability to have adequate time to plan to attend a Commission meeting with only 10 days notice when you don't know that a citizen's petition has been submitted to the agency. So with that in mind, as you work through this, I would respectfully request that you consider giving the public 30 days notice prior to placing any of these citizens petitions on an agenda moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take that into consideration. Okay, let's move to a 10-minute break. Let's try to be back here at 3:40, and then hopefully we can make up some time with, we're moving about 35 minutes.